The first room you were ever in, you don't remember, but you were there. Bright lights overhead, a machine counting your heartbeat, gloved hands reaching for you before your own mother could touch you. Today, more than 98% of births across the developed world happen exactly like that. Inside a hospital, under a ceiling of fluorescent light, attended by people in masks your mother had never met. It feels permanent. It feels like the only safe way a human being could possibly enter the world. But hospitals delivering babies is younger than the light bulb. For 99% of the time our species has existed, 300,000 years of mothers and the daughters of daughters, not one human being was born in a building like that. So how did they do it? How did a woman, alone in a world with no doctors, no anesthesia, no sterile steel, bring a child through the single most dangerous thing the human body is built to do? The answer is older and stranger than you think. Let's start with the problem. Because birth, for a human, is a problem in a way it is not for almost any other animal on Earth. Around 4 million years ago, our ancestors stood up. Walking on two legs reshaped the pelvis. It narrowed, it tilted, it became a bowl that could carry weight upright across open ground. That was the gift. Then came the cost. Because over the next 2 million years, the human brain nearly tripled in size. A narrowing pelvis, a growing head, two trends running in opposite directions through the exact same few inches of bone. Anthropologists call it the obstetrical dilemma, and it is the reason a human birth is harder than a gorilla's, a chimpanzee's, or nearly anything else that walks. It is also the reason that, for almost all of human history, childbirth was one of the most common ways a woman could die. A baby chimp slides through its mother's pelvis with room to spare. A human baby's skull passes through an opening barely larger than itself. And to make it, the child has to do something no other primate's infant has ever had to do. It has to turn. In 1987, an anthropologist named Wenda Trevathan published a book that changed how science understood the moment of human birth. She studied not just the bones, but the choreography, the precise sequence of movements a baby must perform to be born at all. And what she described was a kind of slow rotation in the dark. The infant enters the pelvis facing sideways. Then, partway through, it twists, turning its head a quarter turn so the widest part of the skull lines up with the widest part of the canal. And here's what's fascinating. By the time the baby finally emerges, it is rotated so far that it is facing backward, away from its mother. In every other primate, the newborn comes out facing the mother. She can reach down, guide it to her chest, clear its airway, all on her own. But a human baby arrives facing the wrong way. If the mother reaches down and pulls, she pulls against the natural bend of the infant's spine and risks injuring it. Trevathan saw what that one detail implied. A human mother, for the first time in the history of life, could not safely deliver her own child alone. She needed another pair of hands. That insight became one of the most striking ideas in all of human evolution. Biological anthropologist Karen Rosenberg, working alongside Trevathan, gave it a name: Obligate midwifery. The argument is this: assisted birth is not a modern invention, not a cultural luxury, not something we added once we built villages and hospitals. It is ancient. It may be hundreds of thousands of years old as our wide skulls themselves. And consider how strange the human newborn is compared to almost any other animal. A foal stands within an hour of being born. A human infant cannot hold up its own head for months. It arrives, in a sense, unfinished, because finishing it inside the womb would have made the head far too large to ever pass through. And here's the part nobody talks about. Across the entire human species, every culture ever studied by anthropologists, on every continent, birth is almost never solitary. The Dogon, the Kung of the Kalahari, the people of the high Andes, different languages, different gods, different worlds, but nearly all of them surround a laboring woman with other women. Rosenberg argued that this near-universal pattern isn't coincidence and isn't merely culture. It's written into the body. The same evolutionary pressure that turned the baby backward also turned the mother toward her sisters, her mother, her aunts. toward the woman who had done this before and knew what came next. Birth made us social in a way almost nothing else did. We are, quite literally, the species that is born into other people's hands. So picture it now. Not a hospital. A woman, somewhere, 40,000 years ago, feeling her labor begin. What did she actually have? 6 things, and every one of them we have spent the last century quietly taking away. Hands. Not a stranger's, the hands of women she had known her whole life. Her mother, who had borne her, and her grandmother before that. Hands that had caught a dozen babies, and lost some too, and carried that knowledge in their fingers. Upright. She did not lie on her back. Almost no traditional culture on earth gives birth lying down. She squatted, knelt, or hung from a rope or a post, letting gravity do part of the work, opening the pelvis as much as 30% wider than a woman flat on a bed. Time. There was no clock, no shift change, no schedule the labor had to fit inside. A birth took as long as a birth took. Hours, sometimes more than a day, and no one was standing by to speed it along. Voices. The women around her had all done this. They knew the sounds, the stages, when to wait and when to worry. They knew which positions eased the pain and which slowed everything down. The knowledge wasn't in a book. It lived in the room, passed mouth to mouth across 100,000 years. Skin. The moment the child arrived, it went straight onto her body. No scale, no warmer, no separate room down the hall. Bare skin against bare skin. The oldest thermostat there is. Breath. And then the sound everyone was waiting for. The first cry. The proof. Let that sink in. Every ancestor you have ever had passed through exactly this moment, and someone survived it. Then something changed, and it changed fast. For 300,000 years, birth belonged to women, to homes, to the dark. In just the last 150, it was moved, almost entirely, into the hospital. And in the move, something was traded away. The hospital took the squat and gave you the bed, flat on the back, the one position that narrows the pelvis and works against gravity, chosen not because it helps the mother, but because it lets the attendant see. It took the circle of women who knew you and gave you a rotation of strangers in masks. It took the unhurried hours and gave you a clock, a target, a cascade of interventions when the body didn't perform on schedule. It took the dark and gave you a ceiling of light. It took the hands that had caught 100 babies and gave you, in their place, a profession. And here is the part almost nobody quotes. For a long time, the hospital wasn't even safer. In the 1800s, as birth moved indoors, a woman was often more likely to die delivering in a hospital than in her own bed, killed by an infection the doctors carried in on their own unwashed hands. But here's where it gets extraordinary. Because in the last few decades, science went looking and kept rediscovering what those ancient women already knew. In 2017, a major review by the Cochrane Collaboration pooled dozens of trials covering more than 15,000 births. The question was simple. What happens when a laboring woman has continuous support from another person who is just there, present, steady, never leaving the room? The results were stark. Women with continuous support were less likely to need a cesarean, less likely to need pain medication, had shorter labors, and were far more likely to come away satisfied. No drug, no machine. Just another human being who would not leave. They had measured, in a clinical trial, the exact thing Rosenberg called obligate midwifery, and found that it works. And so the oldest birth practice on earth came back wearing a new name. The doula, the midwife, the birth partner. We spent a century engineering the other women out of the room, and then spent millions proving we should put one back. So go back to that first room, the one you'll never remember. The lights, the machine, the gloved hands that reached for you first. You made it. You're here. And whatever that room looked like, the body that carried you through it was the same body a woman used 40,000 years ago in the dark. The same narrow pelvis, the same backward-turning child, the same ancient need for another pair of hands. For 300,000 years, your foremothers did this without a single thing we now believe is essential. No light, no steel, no doctor. They did it squatting in the dark, held up by women who had done it before, inside a circle that runs back further than any language we still speak. Every one of them, without exception, survived long enough to pass life forward, or you would not be here to wonder about them. You were born into a room of strangers and machines. They were born into a pair of waiting hands. And somewhere underneath the lights and the monitors, the body still remembers which one it was built for.